Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your attention. So I think you've heard it from Manish a few times, but really core to the One View Responsible AI Initiative is public-private. And today, for distinguished folks representing industry, and we're going to cover sort of industry's perspective, public-private partnership with respect to education, research, and government. This isn't about me, so I'm going to give you a quick intro. My name is Bassam Salem. I'm a local tech entrepreneur and a four-time U of U alumnus, so this is home to me. I know. But I would love to go through the room, starting with you, Anthony, and just a quick intro and maybe one or two sentences on what your organization does with respect to AI.
Sure, thanks. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Anthony Annunziata. I'm from IBM. I lead our open innovation work in AI, and I'm the co-founder and steering committee co-chair of an organization called the AI Alliance, which is newly formed to promote open innovation in AI. I am a physicist by training. I've done a number of other things before this in AI for science and in quantum computing, actually. And, I'm happy to be here and talk about really, really important topic, public-private partnerships, which I've have done a bit of in my past and look forward to take part in the conversation.
It's yours. Yeah, I'm Greg Jones. I was actually part of the Ski Institute for many years before I jumped to industry, and now I'm with NVIDIA, and we of course do the graphics cards and AI systems that people are building models on and inferring from models, and I've worked with Ski and then the Utah state government to help build public-private relationships for many years. So really glad to be here in this age of AI now with that same type of idea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Saunders. I am a senior director of data science at Recursion, which many of you may know since it spun out about 10 years ago from the University of Utah here and is now down at the Gateway in a very big, colorful building. We use AI and robotics to accelerate how we do drug discovery. And I'm super excited to be here and talk about some of the public-private connections that we can form and how we can drive forward AI responsibly.
Hi, my name is BJ Vander, Linden. I am the CIO for the Larry H. Miller Company. We're an organization here in Utah that has platforms in real estate, in sports and entertainment, in investments, financial services, healthcare, a number of different places. And excited to be here. From an AI perspective, we are a privately held business looking to be able to, it's really kind of a collection of a bunch of small to medium-sized businesses, and we're trying to figure out how do we properly leverage AI to be able to enhance our capabilities to serve our customers and guests and do it in the right way. So
thank you all. Fantastic. So we're going to try to break up today's discussion. And can everyone hear me okay? We're going to try to break up today's discussion into three areas: industry's partnership with government, industry's partnership with education, and then some industry expectations of ourselves. And we're going to start the conversation with industry government. And Anthony, I'm going to throw the ball to you and ask you to talk about the now famous State Bill 1047 in California. What is it and why is it so controversial?
Okay, we're jumping right in here to pick on California. Okay, actually, before I do, let me just take 20, 30 seconds to say, my opinion is that the governments of the world, the U.S. federal government, state governments are actually doing a very good job addressing in a thoughtful fashion the era of generative AI in an extremely fast-moving and very uncertain environment. I think what Elham had presented from NIST is an extremely strong testament and detail behind that. So with that preface, California 1047 is a bill that is attempting to address safety and trust and responsibility in AI in kind of a grand way, kind of one fell swoop, with the sorts of general statements that make politicians, at least some, smile, but engineers and researchers, cringe. In particular, what it does is tries to mandate a few things. Like it addresses a lot of stuff, right? And there's a lot of good things in the bill, including, general and specific initiatives like support for whistleblowers in organizations that highlight, risks in AI and all of that good stuff. But the concerning things are that it makes some very general requirements on model builders and model release, that they need to prevent ways to misuse models, that they need to be responsible for the liability of derivative works very far downstream, that there are specific kind of requirements like the need to attribute harmful response from a model that may have gone through many cycles of development from its origin all the way back to its origin. It does this in ways that really, really highlight like one of those 12 risk areas, the CBRN, like the existential kind of category of risks, somewhat to the detriment of many other practical day-to-day risks that are actually much kind of like more prevalent like right now. And it also introduces some, reasonable sounding, but not really precision. So it's precision without accuracy, and the threshold of the way it defines what models are in scope to these provisions is this, it was compute and now it's dollars, like it's $100 million or more spent to develop a model, which is kind of an interesting choice of target. And a 10%, $10 million threshold on defining what derivative works are in scope. So it, on the surface, there's a lot of stuff that sounds good, but the particulars aren't really there. And the generalities are such that, a lot of people are concerned that it will have a detrimental effect on open innovation, right? Open source release, but more importantly, collaborative open innovation. That's really, really important to address safety, to address responsible use. And I just want to kind of leave off with kind of a specific view of that. Like if you think about it, all of the really important multi-stakeholder collaboration, multidisciplinary collaboration, it takes a lot of work. It's actually kind of fragile in many cases, especially when it comes to getting industry to invest and take deep part in potentially challenging areas, right? Like risk of deploying AI in different ways. It's actually very easy to incent not doing that. It's actually very easy to get companies in particular to say no. So on my own team, if someone comes to me and wants to work on, join a working group, join something that's, open and collaborative, if I think that that's going to introduce additional risk to the company, I actually can't let them do it. And so it's actually very easy to disincentivize participation in the types of open collaborative development that we really, really need. So that's why it's potentially very concerning.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony, for that. Marissa, let's go to you, please. Following on Anthony's response, what are your thoughts on guardrails in the form of legislation that can be effective in making AI responsible?
Thanks. It's a great question. I think, as Anthony highlighted, there's this tension between good, responsible legislation and stifling innovation. And so we have to be very, very careful there. I also really liked how Elham mentioned this context matters, where and how, and the industry matters a lot around what good guardrails are. And so with that said, I'm going to talk primarily from the perspective of my company, which is medically related. And there, I think it's really important for us to have some of these guardrails. So there was a film in the late 90s, Gattaca, which was this future dystopia where everybody's genetic sequence was public knowledge and people were identified by their genome. And it led to a lot of bad effects. Now, we're a long way from anything like that, but I think it highlights the importance of medical privacy to everybody in this room. And at the same time, there are these immense benefits that can be gained by having large public data sets of medical transcriptomics or genetics data, because it lets us trace the more individual causes of these complex diseases and treat patients in an individualized way. And so what we have to do is we have to find a path forward where we balance that privacy concern with the benefits that we can get out of these public data sets that are available. I think companies also care a lot about data governance. Anthony mentioned a little bit of this, but as an example, if you're using open AI or AI systems, LLMs, to generate code, if that code originated from a piece of code that was a GPL version 3 license, then there carries this legal requirement to open source all of your proprietary code that is linked to that. And so companies are really concerned about adopting and using AI in these ways because it exposes them as well to additional risk. And so that is the second category of guardrails that I think we need to have in place, which is around what are the IP implications within companies as well. I think there's a lot of concern around confidentiality. We have limitations on what we can query through GPT tools within Recursion because we don't want to send out all of the targets that we're interested. We also have concerns around security by querying things to create data queries. Are we creating a knowledge base that people can use to attack our systems? And so I think there's a lot of guardrails around how this information is used, how this information is gathered, and what the implications are of using these generative models downstream. So across the board, I think there's a need for guardrails. The other place I think that legislation could be useful is through thinking about our responsibility for open data sets. We've seen in the computer vision world the value and the innovation that comes from these open data set benchmarks. And I think in the medical industry, those are much more closely regulated and are maybe a little bit biased as well. We know that clinical data tends to be white and male. And so those kinds of biases perpetuate their way into our systems, and having good quality benchmarks can really help us use AI in a responsible way.
Thank you so much for that, Marissa. And sincerely, I hadn't thought about the GPL example. That was a really, really interesting point there. Thank you for that perspective. Greg, let's go to you, please. You're in the middle of all of this at NVIDIA, obviously. How can government policies encourage innovation while protecting public interest?
I don't actually have an answer to that.
Right.
But I think it brings up, you get the idea of very general statements first in the legislation, in the lawmaking, because it's rapidly evolving. So, legislators and regulators are trying to make sure they're broad enough to impact everything they can think of. And then you think of problems that have been in existence for a really long time, right? So patient data, clinical data, we've got clinical data misuse, I'll say controversial use since HeLa cells, right, in cancer work. Mm-hmm. So these problems of confidential data and such and the use of that have been around forever. AI didn't invent those, but AI's using data at a scale we've never seen before. So I think the only way legislation and regulators are going to be able to create meaningful and non-damaging rules and protective rules is the public-private partnerships we're starting here, and how well that data flows and how well it's picked up by regulators and legislators. So the idea of how well we present as universities and companies, data that we're learning about, keep those legislators at the cutting edge of what's going on, and how well they're built to absorb that information. And that's hard. Like if you take a state legislature here, right, they're in office for what, 2 months? Is that about right?
6
and
weeks, I think.
6 weeks.
I think.
And I've talked with a lot of legislators when I was the science advisor. A lot of their staff are really young people. And so they're not necessarily AI experts. There may not be people on their staff ready to learn AI as quickly as we want to feed it to them. And so how do you build these structures for public-private partnerships to inform law? That's for the academic to state and the corporate to state. That's, to me, where the challenge is how do you build a seamless information pipeline to really create informed laws? Never mind about what can we do for the states with AI. I think there's a ton of that, tax chatbots, medical chatbots, being able to give more accurate information to people, suicide helplines. There's so many good things you could do. So if we just think about the states and the federal as being, we've got to get the right legislation going, instead of adding in what can we actually do to make everything more robust, more stable, higher efficiency with the states. We've kind of missed the public-private partnership, big ticket item, right? But that information pipeline will work for both of those types of ideas.
That's great. Greg, you had told me something I was not aware of, that at NVIDIA
It might not be true.
You have
right? So
that NVIDIA, there are more software engineers than hardware engineers, if I'm not mistaken.
that is what I've been told.
And
Right.
and
Yeah.
so
And it's been that way since before the AI.
but you're not actually building LLMs. You're not building models yourselves, or are you?
Yeah, I'm sure we are.
So you're
Yeah.
building some
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah.
Let's jump from government to higher education, to the point you were just making, and we'll go to BJ. BJ, obviously AI is going to require a different set of skills, both for the practitioners and for use. How can industry partner with higher education to make sure that we have the right talent, the right skill sets, both in industry and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions. It's interesting. If you, I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of different executives, board members, other people within trade industries, and it's really funny, almost comical at times to talk to people about AI, particularly Gen AI, and their understanding of AI is what the headlines have been within the last 3 weeks of whatever trade journal or newspaper or whatever's been out there. And I think one of the most important things for people, or that educations of or institutions of higher learning can actually help us with, is educating people on what is it and how does it impact my business. Oftentimes we get caught up, I think, quite heavily in the technology of it, and we lose sight of, well, what is it? What does it actually do? A great analog would be I could take a medication and I could ask the doctor, hey, what is it? Well, it's this, compound with these structures and it does X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, I don't care about that. What does it do for me? And I think that's a really key thing of helping people to understand, well, what is it? And how does it actually help me from a business perspective? Because it's this black hole of knowledge that somebody's like, well, I throw something in and I get a really cool picture of a cat dating a dog, and that's Gen AI. And I think that's just, it shortchanges it. So what I think that I'm looking for from a business perspective is I'm looking for people across all spectrums coming out of the universities that have a fundamental understanding of how AI, particularly Gen AI right now, can help them more effectively work. I'm not necessarily looking for productivity or even efficiency. I'm looking for people who are more effective, because I can be super efficient and super productive and pointed in the wrong direction. So I need people who are effective. And that may mean understanding, for example, that utilizing Gen AI around code development is a great tool, especially for a junior developer, because it's almost going back to the old school pair programming, helping them to kind of upskill. People have been using tools like this anyway for a long time. They just work faster now. Yeah. But at some point you exceed the average, which is what an LLM produces. It's the average. And so how do we then utilize that to better upskill them? Or if I'm a business professional and I want to do something more than simply write a job description or a potential policy or, my next social media post, how do I utilize the tool to actually enhance my capability to produce the meaningful work? I'm a big believer in the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. And I think how can I, if 20% of the work that I do adds 80% of the value to the organization, how do I make that 20 to go to 22 or 25 and reduce the non-value added? And I think that AI is a fantastic tool for helping move that along. But the key is, how do I produce people that understand those impacts and that and how that helps me from a business perspective? The technology will come, as that's not going to go away, and I'm not discounting that. I just think that sometimes the focus is too heavily on the technology, not enough on the ability to impact business outcomes.
And BJ, are you feeling like you're having to train these folks on augmenting their talents with AI, or are you feeling that higher ed is generating these folks already?
No, we're having to train them. We're having to train them
in-house.
Yeah, and quite frankly, we're still so early. So I'm not saying anyone's failing. Most of the people's learning right now consists of, I got that paper due. I got ChatGPT. Let's go play with it. And all of a sudden I go, wait a minute. It wrote a paper. What else can it do? I did a little weird presentation about a year ago to our leadership team at LHM. And I said, hey, I want you to go play with it. They were like, wait, what? No. I want you to actually go play with it. Go plan a trip. Let me give you an example. And I'd gone to Germany and that previous summer. And I'm like, hey, let me just show you. I'm this type of person. I want to see these types of things. I have this much time. Can I go play with it? And like, just see how it begins to produce content and ask it questions about things you know about. So you know whether or not it's producing valuable information so you can see through the lies. I had put up, for example, tell me all the books that BJ Vanderlyn has written. And apparently I'd written one called From Cowboy Boots to the Boardroom, and news to me. But I think that there's opportunities to just play with it and understand what's happening within the proper guardrails. Of course, don't put out your 5-year strategic plan with all your internal financials. Yeah. But we're having to train people and help them to understand what's happening. And I think there's better use cases in an educational setting where people can play with it more, and maybe even helping them to write the papers versus turning away from it and learning how the tool works and how do I become more effective in the work I'm doing.
And I really appreciated that comment about effective versus efficient and so on. What skills specifically, beyond becoming familiar, what skills would you talk to the higher ed folks in this audience as to say, these are the skills we'd like to have the grads have so I can hire them?
A way too oft used term, but is real, is prompt engineering. Help them to know how you can utilize prompt engineering to ask the right questions. A simple phrase of saying, I need you to act as if you're, a football coach and I'm working on such and such skill. And it's crazy how that simple phrase will change, telling it what to act like and how it will act. I think some of the other specific skills are understanding what traceability is, understanding how to know where those resources are coming from. And from a technical perspective, I think people really need to understand RAG, retrieval augmented generation. They really got to understand that. And then even beyond AI, it's data. Many executives believe that AI, just throw it on top of what we have and it will solve the problem. Yeah, good luck. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So helping people to understand clear data engineering, data quality, understanding traceability of the data itself. Where did it actually come from? How was it generated? Key and critical to the ability to produce good quality content. So those are some of the more specific skills, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Marissa, let's go back to you, please. Your company is obviously at the heart of advanced research, having stemmed from the university. Let's look at a research and innovation perspective. How can universities like the U contribute to AI innovation?
So I think the first area that is prime on my mind is assessing quality and bias of these foundation models. I think I've talked about the bias in the medical space and that we know the stereotypical patient in clinical trials is younger and healthier and less geographically and racially diverse than you see in the clinic. And so having that data flow into generative models in the healthcare space would be problematic. Here, another local company, HireView, is focused on interview processes, and they've actually shown you can do a good job of this. They spend a lot of time and a lot of effort on applying tests to make sure that their models are not gender or racially biased, and they actually do better than humans. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think the universities is a great place to spearhead that research. The other place that I think about is, can universities be stewards for these data sets that we use in foundation models or in training for innovation? I was reading an article the other day that says something like 20 or 30% of the content that was on the internet a decade ago has now vanished, and there are private places like the Wayback Machine, but those are sort of at risk. They may lose funding, they may get sued and go out of business. And so we risk losing a lot of the data that some of these generative models are trained on. And we need to think carefully as a society about what information there is that we want to preserve, what we want to have responsible stewardship for. And so I think those are the two main areas that I think about.
Thank you so much, Marissa. So we've covered government, we've covered higher education. Let's go to industry and industry's expectations of ourselves. And Greg, let me go to you. What are your thoughts on how industry can dip its toe through pilots and how pilots can play a role in these partnerships?
Glad you. First off, I want to mention I'm really encouraged to hear that 20-30% of the data has been lost, because there's a couple videos out there that maybe I might not have said the right stuff. So I'm becoming more hopeful than I was in the past. So the idea is, so I've been working with Manish and Penny and you and team, and the idea is, what can the university, and I'll actually say universities and state, what can they combine to do to help Utah become this AI destination, right? And one of the ideas is, what can you do with industry? And always, whenever the university says industry, it always lands on workforce development. And that's kind of the easy way out. That's obvious, right? We should be training students to work in our local industries. But can you actually, right now, NVIDIA GPUs and architecture are really hard to come by. So can you do a bigger state motion to get those resources accessible by not only your universities, but by your local industries and such? We've seen those types of things. We did some of that work in the carbon fiber industry a few years ago. So sometimes when there's a scarcity, can the university and state help, put a platform together to get to that work? So one way we're exploring, what workloads would be reasonable for the state to help support through the universities, by actually doing equipment purchases or making equipment available through the cloud, what have you, is POCs with industry. So we've decided these, and that is proof of concepts. And the idea, just really informally, is the idea is a proof of concept would come with an intern attached to it from a university, right? So you get that workforce development. It also have to be important to industry, right? So I'll call Recursion. We've already started talking to ARUP. We have a really nice foundational model idea with ARUP that would be, I think, a really significant boon for not just ARUP and the university, but for the state. And then the thought of, what does that mean, being able to build foundational models of unique data that our companies have access to? So these POCs are going to start exploring that. What compute will we need to do an ARUP foundational model? Those are the questions we're starting to ask. And then as this initial POC goes through, as we've discussed it pipe cleans the architecture to do these. Then how do we go to the state leadership, the university leadership, and say, here's what the tab for doing that for the state will look like. Here's what the purchase equipment, here's the personnel, this is how much it's going to cost. And then can we run that through, the next year and a half, and derive funding for that, and really make this an AI hotspot, right? And the state's done it before with graphics. It's done it with the internet, right? We were foundational, both those industries. So can we do that again with AI is a question, and carbon composites, right? So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg. BJ, let's go back to you again. Building on what Greg just said, as we execute more and more of these initiatives within companies, to what degree should companies themselves be responsible for their own use of artificial intelligence, and what best practices do you have in mind for how we can do so in a responsible and ethical way?
I think any business leader who tells you they shouldn't be responsible for their use of AI should get fired. As with any tool set that you're going to be utilizing, you carry the full responsibility. I mean, go ask Delta if somehow their customers are blaming CrowdStrike for the outage, right? I mean, Delta's the one taking the hit. With that, though, becomes the necessity of a business to understand what it is you're using, who your partners are, and really understanding what your partners are doing with that. I honestly don't think it's that much different now. It's just the stakes have risen because of the pace of change. Businesses have always been held responsible for, you used your data, you've had a breach, you've had, you sold bad goods, whatever it might be. There are controls mechanisms that have been in place and will continue to be in place to be able to hold businesses accountable to that. So I think in terms of the question of what are some of the standards or what are some of the things that businesses should do, again, understand your partners and know exactly what they're doing. you're buying a product from them, you can hold them accountable. So talk to them. And if they're unwilling to tell you what's going on, well, that could be a red flag. Maybe you don't buy from them. Also understand within your own world how things are going about. Marissa's talked about the importance of understanding the bias within the data sets that they're going after. Look, we all want to move really fast, especially from a business perspective. You want to outpace your competitors. Don't be stupid though. Like really understand what you're trying to accomplish. Again, we're talking about effectiveness. It's not just how quickly you can move. In addition to that, I think that going back to my comments before, it is so important to understand your data and where it's coming from and how you're utilizing that. And again, these aren't new problems. This has always been out there. But understanding what that data is, how it's being used, there's a little bit of a mantra sometimes from a business perspective of, I'm just going to collect all this data because I'll need it at some point. Okay. That very well may be true, but what are you doing to protect and understand that? And if you're just throwing it all in a data lake and saying, I'll get to it at some point, well, that's not smart. Spend a little time understanding what it is. You may not go through the whole effort of structuring it. You may not go through the entire effort of building all these different tools and so forth on it, but at least understand where it came from, why you have it, what the anticipated piece there is. And then I think that you've got to have really strong governance just around the use of technology. I was in New York last Thursday speaking on a similar panel with just businesses, and Guardian Life was on that, MasterCard was on that. We were talking about the use of AI and the way in which it's being used. And what was interesting, for example, MasterCard talked about, they have a lot of systems that don't have human in the loop on AI because the pace at which transactions have to be approved and the work that they go through to ensure that they can trust that system to operate the way it's supposed to. Whereas Guardian Life was saying, well, we always have to have a human in the loop because we're talking about financial products where an individual is a customer and it's a longer term business transaction. And so I think that that's a really good example of two different industries, both trying to be responsible with their use of AI, but also understanding what the limitations are and the level to which they're going to go to ensure that there's repeatability in what we're trying to do. So it's a little bit of a rambling answer, but hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, BJ. Okay. So Anthony, we opened the discussion with you. We're going to close the discussion with you. So if you have any questions, please prepare them. We'll take them after Anthony's answer. There are a few companies, I can't actually think of a company that has a longer heritage with AI than IBM. And IBM's Watson brand. And I didn't mean that to be an ad, but Watson's been around for a long time. What guidance do you have for the industry in terms of AI partnerships?
Yeah, IBM has been in the AI field for a while. Traces back to the 50s, maybe even earlier, depending on how you count AI. Yeah, there's a loose analogy, I'd say, at least in our own view, to what IBM experienced and part of the industry experienced in 2011. So you may remember, you may not, it's okay too. In 2011, IBM Research demonstrated this natural language question answering capability applied to the game Jeopardy! And it was a pretty impressive task at the time. It was really one of the first times the general public could see that an AI system could handle natural language inquiry in a broad kind of set of knowledge in terms of Q&A accuracy. What happened after that, I think, is actually very instructive, for the present in a way, because what we tried to do is no surprise. We tried to take the technology and apply it to lots of different industry use cases, with great fanfare in some cases, too much, to be quite honest. And when we tried to do that, it's kind of the classic problem of taking, something that works generally well in a certain format and trying to apply it in places where you need typically much higher accuracy, much more significant domain expertise, a much higher threshold for trust in terms of making sure that the system would not introduce new risks to the business. And the way we decided, I mean, it was a multi-year effort with successes and non-successes. The way we approached it was to, yes, get very close to different industry companies, But we did it in a way that was actually too close to the domain, actually. So there wasn't the right balance in between. And so what we ended up is a lot of dead ends where you can apply some task-specific AI, but it didn't extend, it didn't generalize enough. And the other big thing was that we took a pretty proprietary approach, right? Not unlike what a lot of players are doing today in AI. And in hindsight, the reason that we've actually the reason I have my role, the reason it existed, and what I've been doing for the past year to pivot the company toward an open approach in AI technology is directly lessons from that. So to carry over into the present discussion, I'd say there's a couple of things that I could definitely emphasize from that. So first, to find the right balance of general capability and specific capability to make sure that you can get an AI system to achieve the requirements of a different various domains of application. You need to work closely with people that are practitioners, of course, but you need to do it in a much more open fashion, right? So where there's deep involvement, not just from single clients in kind of product type of scenarios, but from broader coalitions and from universities. It's really, really important. And I think the second, it's related strongly to that, and I think we've talked about it a fair bit today, is in the evaluation of AI systems. Certainly better benchmarks that are specific to domains are really important. We need much better ways to test in that way, but ways that also don't squeeze and compromise the generality and in some sense the creativity of the system. That balance is really tough, right? It's a similar concern that we had, more than 10 years ago. And then I'd say, on the kind of methods end of things, it's not just about creating benchmarks. It's actually about kind of a twofold change in how we approach measuring and testing and evaluating systems. One, to embrace the statistical nature of systems, which is not intractable. Just because these systems are statistical, there's a certain amount of probability, does not mean we can't well characterize them. It just means it's a lot harder. And so it's a tremendously, I think, opportune time for academic researchers, for mathematically inclined people, statistical people, to get much more deeply involved in determining new methods of AI systems. And then there's a practice end of it too, which is how do we evolve what has become a very refined discipline in software engineering, right? Test-driven development, DevOps, incremental development, right? Into something that we can take the same sorts of lessons learned and general ways of building software and apply them to AI systems, including incremental updates, broad test coverage of features that are being developed, the ability to pull back things that may not work right quickly. These methods are not developed in AI yet, but it would be really good if they were, and it's a great challenge to work on openly and collaboratively because it needs a lot of good minds from a lot of places to do it.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So I should have reiterated Penny's guidance around the questions that we're going to take them through the QR code and only through the QR code. Is that correct, Penny? I think it's all the mics are here. So if you could please scan and place your questions in the app, we'll take it from there. In the meantime, I have an ad hoc question for you all. At our company, we today have no policy around employee use of AI, and certainly employee use of AI using proprietary data. To what degree have your organizations addressed employee use of AI from a policy perspective?
Well, when things first kind of came out, we blocked it as best as we could. Not because I didn't want anyone to touch it, but I didn't want anyone to touch it without knowing what they were doing to some degree. So we blocked it to start, and then we crafted a policy along with a small training piece of content that was put together to just do some quick education on what it was. And then the policy it was an add-on to our acceptable use policy we already have from a technology perspective. And it talked about what information, confidential and private information, what doesn't get put into these public facing models. And we kept that. And then once they accepted the policy and went through the training, then we put them into a different group that allowed access to the tools. And that lasted for about a year. And by that time we turned over most of the people and got them through the training. And at this point it's not blocked on our systems. Good luck, by the way, trying to block it if anyone really wants to try. And so mainly it was a training intent and saying, hey, look, here's what we're going to do. Don't put out confidential information, which, by the way, we already tell you not to do. So
thank you for that answer, BJ. And actually, we'll take that answer and go to the audience questions, if that's okay. Let's start with the one that has the most support here. Do you think there are gaps today between the use of AI and consumer protection? We are near a point where companies will know what we can pay and price accordingly. What harm or benefits can you see to consumer welfare? Who wants to tackle that one? I certainly don't.
I can
It's
start.
nice being the moderator.
So I think there are still significant gaps. I hadn't thought deeply about the pricing perspective, but I did see in my feed just yesterday that LinkedIn has turned on that that your posts can be used in their generative AI models by default, and you have to go in and opt out. So that's a clear example of where the consumer, the user, is giving a lot of data to companies, and I think there's still a gap there.
Thank you, Marissa. We have quite a few other questions. Let me go to the next one. Energy consumption is a huge concern for AI infrastructure. How do we responsibly address this demand given potential impacts on our climate? We're all going to look at you, Greg.
I mean, this is, I don't know if this question is, I mean, so the systems are getting much more energy efficient, right? There's no doubt about that. That's a huge drive in the industry. NVIDIA is doing it. Everyone's looking for a more efficient flop, I guess you can think. But the world's demand for those flops is going to keep increasing, right? So this boils down to not so much the AI ecosystem, but the shipping ecosystem. All these ecosystems drop down to how much power, where do we get our power from? That's a much larger question than the AI compute question, right? It's going to be one of the growth areas of energy use. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But I don't think let's say you say AI can only have this much power off the grid. You haven't solved the energy problem, right? It's going to exacerbate it, but there's nothing you can do limiting the AI growth that will really impact the energy in a positive way, where you've got a lot of other uses that as we grow as humanity, we're going to drive up energy usage. We can be more efficient, but if you have 10 cars and you make them more efficient and you then have 12 cars, then you're probably at you're using more energy. So that's all around all the industries is the way I think of it. That's not a company statement. That's a great, my personal statement.
Thank you, Greg. And please, let me know if you'd like to add to any of these answers. Next, what percentage of students and professors and business and government employees, I would presume, do you think are using AI today in any way? And how do you think that will change in 2 to 3 years? So what do you think adoption is on an individual basis?
I think the problem is trying to define what adoption actually means. There are quite a few tools that people use in their everyday life today that incorporate some component of AI, generative AI, and people are using them without necessarily realizing it. Your standard search engine of Google is now utilizing a generative AI component to be able to generate search. Many people are swapping other products, like say a Perplexity or something like that, to do their search, and they're not, and they're using it every single day. Is that the use of generative AI? So I think the definition is hard, but I would say percentages with students, it's got to be 80+%. In fact, I was just reading an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, where OpenAI has now hired their first learning executive, and they're looking to partner with schools on how to bring ChatGPT as a product into schools and how do you properly do that. They They see significant statistical increases in usage of the product when school is in session, which is now. And so I think that students would have to be very high, and I would say business executives in many of them would be probably much lower. And I honestly think it's more of an age demographic versus a role in life, just because they're so much more used to utilizing the tools in different ways.
Thank you.
I think you got to look at the question. It's more refined than that, right? It's how many people are purposefully, knowingly using AI, and how many people are being impacted by the fact they're using AI, right? And the numbers will go up, but there's not as many purposefully using it, students and such. But that number will probably accelerate even faster than just people being impacted by AI, because that number is probably already quite high.
I really appreciate that. Okay, last question, and I think this one's a really interesting one. You've touched on it already. How can responsible AI address real-world racial and ethnic biases in education and interviewing without overcorrecting to an unrealistic ideal? And I'll stop there on the rest of the question. Any thoughts on that?
So I think one of the things that I'm excited about for AI, and particularly as we think about how do we benchmark AI systems, generative systems for bias, is that it can help us uncover this hidden or latent bias in our society, in our language, and the documents that we have in the past. And so I think it helps us to benchmark how we're doing. And I think that we can do that in hiring, we can do that in medicine, and then we can collectively decide what that standard should be and how we're going to shift that over time to get to the place of equity that I think we all want to be.
Thank you all so much for your insights and for your time. Please join me in thanking our panelists.